Indiana. This month we're concentrating our studies on the book of Revelation. We've called it a month of victory. And hopefully 5 days of the week thus far, you've been receiving the little posts that Jordan has been posting out for us from the articles, brief little vignettes we've written from the chapters in the book of Revelation. And for those who've been able to read them and respond, we appreciate that very, very much. Last week, Jordan introduced the series that we're doing this month. And so today, I want us to look at John's picture of heaven. John's picture of heaven. Actually, it's a picture of victory. When John writes this revelation, the people to whom he addresses this book are undergoing a great trial. In fact, in the first chapter, he will talk about twice, he'll mention, I am the Alpha and the Omega. And the value of that is that these people that are receiving this letter need to know that Jesus, who began this all, will be there at the end. In fact, throughout the book, you have the question, the cry, how long, O Lord, how long? Because of the suffering that they are undergoing. I don't know that we have the ability to identify completely, to equate with the challenge that these New Testament Christians in the time that John writes the Revelation is undergoing. At least in the United States of America, we don't face anything that is akin to what these disciples are facing. Perhaps in other parts of the world, there may be something that's a closer parallel, where to be a Christian would cost you the price of your life. But we don't face that today. We have the privilege of living under a form of government that does not oppress us. We're able to express our faith willingly. We're able to express our faith freely. And so when we read this book, perhaps wanting on our part is the experience that these people are enduring. But this book wasn't just simply written to those disciples, it was also written for us. While not addressed to us, it is written for us. That regardless of what kind of times that we face, whether it be collective or whether it be individual, whatever the trial may be, the book has value for us, and the book is intended to say to us that yes, there is victory. And I think that's important for us to contemplate. That's important for us to think about. We live in a world where at almost every breath, every word, something oppressive is spoken. Something that is negative is spoken. It's so easy to focus on the negative in this world. It's so easy to focus on the negative in the church. But when John writes this, he writes this with a point of view of victory, with a point of view of conquering, with a point of view of great hope, with something that is held out not as a maybe, but as an eventuality, as a reality that they will experience. And he writes that for us to help us see that we too not may experience that, but will experience that. So there are some things that John writes in this Revelation in chapters 21 and 22 that I want you to think about. I want you to think about the perfect fellowship, the perfect happiness, the perfect security, the perfect provisions that are pictured for us in this book. And begin, first of all, reading with me in Revelation chapter 21 and verse 1. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. Notice the perfect fellowship that John talks about here. John identifies and talks about, behold, the tabernacle of God. The tabernacle was that temporary place where, as they were wandering through the wilderness, that they would come when the tabernacle would be set up, and there would be the presence of God. And there they would come into the presence of God. It was indicative of God being with them. It was indicative of God having fellowship with them. But John takes that imagery of the tabernacle and gives us that imagery with regard to heaven itself. Not because heaven is something temporary, but taking that which they could identify with and pull forward and make an application to say, if that's how they understood God to be in their presence, then this will be how you can understand being in the presence of God will be in a perfect fellowship. I think we'd all agree that we have fellowship with God today. And I think we'd all agree that as we are assembled here this morning, that God is present with us. But I would also suggest that while we have that fellowship today and God's presence is with us, it is not as it is going to be in heaven. There is going to be a perfect, a complete fellowship that we have not experienced, that we do not experience today. The tabernacle was to indicate the presence of God. And there God would dwell, and there they could come into the presence of God, and there they would belong. Everyone is there, would appreciate being in the presence of God, having fellowship with God perfectly, and everyone there would belong. It's interesting that John uses the tabernacle. And I recognize the tabernacle comes in many years past the events of Genesis chapter 11. But it's interesting to me in Genesis chapter 11 where you have the story of the Tower of Babel. The time in which man spoke in a common language, the languages were not confused. And man in that time when the languages were not confused sought to what? To elevate themselves to a status that was equal with God. The cities, however, that man sought to build then and ever since, all those cities that men have sought to build, that men have placed their names on, all have fallen, all have crumbled. With regard to Babel, God said, I will confuse the languages of men. Confuse the languages of men. Why? Because He wanted us to understand fellowship was not based on what we would provide. The fellowship would be based on what He would provide. I've said this, perhaps you've said it as well. I can't wait to be in heaven to be able to ask Peter and fill in the blank. I can't wait to be able to be in heaven and ask Paul and you fill in the blank. Let me ask you something. When we're there in that perfect fellowship, are we really going to be concerned with asking Peter, why did you do that? Why in the face of everything you've seen and done and understood, did you deny the Lord? Is that really going to be the question? And are we really going to be puzzled? And are we really going to be interested in asking Paul, you talked about that thorn in the flesh. And you spoke in third person about that vision that you said if you told us, you'd have to kill us. Well, that's not exactly what he said. But if you said, if I told you, you wouldn't understand. What was it? Describe that for me. What was that thorn? Is that really going to be what we're interested in? I doubt it. What is going to be important is what he says later in verse 3. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and He will dwell with them, and they shall be His people. God Himself will be with them and be their God. What is going to be of value to us then is going to be the fact that we are with God. I've said this other times. My physical address is 1406 Shadow Hills Drive in Wiley, Texas. But that's only the physical address. What makes that home is because she is there. And wherever she's at, that's home. And what's going to make heaven heaven is not because Paul's there, not because Peter's there, not because Abraham is there, but because God is there. And being there with God Paul and Peter and their dilemmas were matter little. The second thing I want you to see is I want you to see the perfect happiness that he talks about, beginning in verse 4. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I will make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life free to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things. I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. What we really want to focus on are verses 4 and 5. Notice what he says in verse 4. He will wipe away every tear from the eye. No more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain. Wipe away every tear from our eye. Do we know what that is? Do we know how to live in that world? Disappointments come, heartaches come, hurt comes, loss comes. And as a result of that, we shed tears. But in this land, there are going to be no more tears. There's going to be no more pain. Do we know what it is to live in a world without pain? People wake up every morning stiff, the joints don't work. Sometimes people wake up every morning and they hurt because of medical treatments. Sometimes people wake up every morning and hurt because they're missing a limb. Pain is all around us. But here, we're going to see in this with God a contentment, a happiness where there is no more pain. I'm reminded of the story of the children of Israel as they wandered throughout the promised land, where it says their shoes never wore out and their clothes never wore out. They never wanted for shoes or clothes. We suffer the loss of property. We suffer the loss of life. And tears and pain come. In a land where there'll be no more death. Do we live in a world where we've never experienced death? If there's a person that has never experienced death, it's only because that person is so young in life. But if we've lived long, we have experienced death, loss that has been significant to us. Loss of a parent, loss of a child, loss of a loved one, loss of a close friend. But imagine, this is going to be a world in which there's going to be no more death. I must tell you, I have a hard time getting my arms around that. I have a hard time trying to imagine a world I'd never experienced with no pain, no tears, no loss, no death, no suffering at all. Because it is such a kissing cousin to our lives. We're so close and intimate with all of those things. Someone asked the question, yes, but what if? What if my loved one? What if my mate is not there? What if my child is not there? Verse 5 says, Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I will make all things new. And he said to me, Write, these words are true and faithful. And what John is saying there is you may not be able to figure everything out. I may not be able to figure everything out. But God will take care of that. I'm reminded of the conversation that Jesus had with the Sadducees in the week before his crucifixion when they come to him asking the question, which they thought was a heart stopper for sure. Here's this man, here's this woman who has had 7 husbands, all are dead. And the question we want to know is, in the resurrection, whose wife will she be? That question had stumped all the Pharisees. And Jesus answers 2 things. He said, number 1, you've not been reading the Word of God, because if you've been reading the Word of God, you would have known that Abraham is alive, Jacob is alive, and Isaac is alive, and therefore, if they're alive, their bodies in the grave, there must be a resurrection. And by the way, if you've read the Word of God and can't figure it out, here's the answer. Whatever the intractable problem is with that question, God is equal to the question. God can answer the question. God will take care of what that dilemma is. I don't have the answer. I don't know the answer. But I know this. I know God is able to answer that. And if God is able to answer that and have His promise, then whatever that dilemma is with regard to the loss of someone that we love that may not be there, the presence of God is going to be so transcendent, so awesome, that our focus and our fellowship will be completely upon Him, and He will be able to handle that and enable us to have that happiness with Him. With Him. Every face will behold Him. Everyone will have their name on have His name on their forehead. Everyone will have their countenance changed because of having fellowship with Him. The feet of everyone shall follow, the hands of everyone shall serve, the heart of everyone shall embrace Him. All shall behold Him. Once again, I have a hard time getting my hands around that. I have a hard time understanding how that happiness can be there whenever we experience the things that we've previously talked about and the heartbreak that comes because of the loss of those things. But John says, write it, God is a true and faithful witness. God is equal to and God is able to handle and fulfill the promise that He has made, whatever the challenge may be. Then we come to the perfect security. Look at verse 9. Then one of 7 angels who had the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came to me and talked with me, saying, come and I will show you the bride and the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in spirit to a great and high mountain, who showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out from heaven, having the glory of God. Her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystals. And she had a great and high wall with 12 gates, 12 angels at the gates, names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, 3 gates on the west. Now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, its gates and its walls. The city is laid out as a square, its length as great as a breadth. And he measured the city with a reed, 12,000 furlongs. Its length and breadth and height are equal. Then he measured the wall, 124 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. Then the construction of its wall was of jasper. The city was of pure gold, like clear glass. The foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, and the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were the 12 pearls. Each individual gate was of 1 pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, like transcendent glass. Did you get the repetition of the description of the wall in this reading? The wall, the wall, the wall, the measurement of the wall. I don't know if we have the ability to appreciate the value of a wall like they had in that day. The wall for them was a place of security. The wall for them was not what we talk about a wall today and what we hear mentioned in our news today about a wall. It was not to keep people out because they were illegal aliens coming into a country where they had no formal status or citizenship. It was a wall that was intended to keep people out, but it was a wall that was intended for protection. It was a wall that was intended for fortification. In our open society, we don't have those kind of walls. We're able to come and go. Our fortification is because we have a citizenship in heaven. I think when we sing the song Amazing Grace, when we've been there 10,000 years by shining as the sun, when we've been there 10,000 years by shining as the sun, it's going to be like what? Like it doesn't matter. Because everything is secure. We like security, don't we? We have alarms on our houses. We put the little cameras on our houses. We have the Ring device. We have the super souped up camera devices. We get the signal on our smart device that tells us there's been action outside the front door, action outside the garage. Why do we do that? Because we want to feel secure. We have GPSs. Our children have GPSs on their smartphones. We want their phone turned on for find a friend. We want their phone turned on so we can locate them. We're able to put those GPS tracking devices on their phones so we can see where they're at and have a good idea of what they're doing. Why? Because we're trying to be nosy parents. Because we are ultimately concerned about their security. We want to feel secure. And notice how John describes this security. It's not a wall where the foundations have been dug, but it's a wall where the foundations have been hewn. Notice he describes the first foundation was jasper. And notice the precious jewels that he uses to describe this foundation. Have you ever imagined walking on a rainbow with all of its brilliant colors transcendent in the sky? Well, what John is saying is in heaven there's going to be a foundation and you're going to get to walk on a rainbow. And it's going to be secure. No adversary will have access. Even the ultimate adversary will not have access. We'll be secure in the presence of God. But then turn to chapter 22 and begin reading with me in verse 1. I want you to see the perfect provisions that are here. He showed me a pure river of water, of life, clear as a crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its streets, on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. There shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it. His servants shall serve him. They shall see his face. His name shall be on their foreheads. There shall be no night there. They need no lamp nor light of the sun, for the Lord God gives them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. Notice he talks about the river of the water of life that flows through the middle of the city. And on the banks of that river, the water of life that flows through the city are going to be trees. And those trees are going to be the trees that give the tree of life. That takes us back to the garden scene, doesn't it? Where you have the rivers coming and going, and you have that one tree of life. That tree of life that was intended to sustain the life and to give them life. And John says they shall never want, because why? It shall be a tree yielding life-giving sustenance. The provisions that God will give there shall be abundant. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there's going to be no more curse because the throne of God is there. Here's John's picture of victory that is ultimately stamped again when he says in verse 4, they shall see his face, his name shall be on their foreheads. Everyone there will belong. Everyone there will belong to him. Everyone will belong there because he, by his grace, has made the provision for them to be forgiven to be there. And because that provision of grace has been given, these that are there have been transformed to be in his image. And because they've been transformed to be in his image, he will finish that transformation and the provisions will be abundant. No one there will ever utter a word of hesitation or a word of regret. Last week, you had to have your head under a rock if you didn't know it was Super Bowl weekend. I'm not saying you had to be a sports enthusiast, but if anybody in the United States of America did not know it was Super Bowl weekend, then obviously they live in the part of these contiguous United States that have no power whatsoever. I remember back in the 90s, which is as far back as we can go with our Dallas Cowboys, we who are fans, and the last glory days that we had, because ever since then we have been utter disappointments. It's like America's team has become America's flop. But I remember back in the 90s where the Cowboys won 3 out of 4 Super Bowls and should have won 4 out of 4 Super Bowls, not 5 out of 5 Super Bowls. The table was set. And I remember when they would be playing those Super Bowls. Inevitably, the Super Bowl always begins at 5:30 something. Well, at that time, we were meeting at 6 o'clock. And we might be able to see the beginning of the Super Bowl before we left the house, but inevitably, we'd come to an assembly like this, and those Super Bowl weekends were the quickest this building or that building at College Park have ever been emptied. Then you didn't mind being the lockup guy, because people would rush out to be able to go home and watch the Super Bowl. One game particularly, they were playing the Buffalo Bills, and the Cowboys were smashing them. The Bills had no chance that day. I exaggerate the point, but it was like the score was 40-0. It wasn't that, I exaggerate. It was like 40-0. And if someone should happen to come back as people are exiting and say, the Cowboys are winning, there's 2 minutes left in the game, the score is 40-0, they're on their 2-yard line about to score again. Well, back in that day, we didn't have DVR, we had VCR. And so, we'd go home. If you were a true Cowboy fan, you'd rewind it from the beginning, you'd watch it from beginning to end. You wouldn't start there. And so you'd come down to that point in the game in which now 2 minutes are left, in which that loudmouth came in and blew it for everybody and told you the Cowboys are about to score, they're ahead 40-0. Emmett's on the 2-yard line about to be handed the ball and go across the goal line. And you get to that point in the game where that happens, but what we do not know and what is not told is that as Emmett is in the air flying over the goal line, someone punches the ball out of his hand. And he fumbles the ball and the Bills recover. Do you then, at that moment, having realized the score is 40-0, watching that game go, oh no, the Cowboys are going to lose? No. Do you think anybody that day ever emptied the stands, vacated the stands because, oh no, Emmett fumbled the ball, and now then there's no hope for our team winning, and people just filed out of the stands, and in their cars going home, on the way home, they turn the radio on and find, oh, relief of relief, the Cowboys won. No. We know what happened. They won 3 out of 4 Super Bowls. Nobody turned their TV off. Nobody left early. You ever been to a Ranger ball game where the Rangers are getting slaughtered in the 7th inning? And you think, I've had enough of this. I've got an hour's drive home. I'm going home only to turn the news on later on that night and realize the Rangers have come back and won the game. That can happen in baseball. What I would suggest to you is, what John is telling us here is, everybody who walks out of the stadium early, everybody who quits and walks out of the stadium early is going to look back, and they're going to have a day of regret. But there's something else. Like that Cowboy game, we understood the victory was already in the bag. Because with 2 minutes left in the game, nobody comes back from a 40-0 deficit. And what John is telling us is, everybody that continues to play in the game, and here's the point of revelation, is going to be victorious. What we've got is a picture of God's DVR. God's rolling the picture for us to tell us, don't quit. Don't quit. Everybody on God's team wins. The streets are gold and the paths and the pathways are cobbled with gold. Every street leads in the right direction for the right destination. No one stumbles. No one falls. Kindness is the norm. Service is the habit. The straight way is the broad way. Passion is the heartbeat of everyone. Don't quit. Don't quit. Don't walk away too early. And just because we know how the game turns out also doesn't mean that we can take for granted that the adversary has quit and given up. John's beautiful picture of heaven, John's beautiful picture of victory. A month of victory from the revelation of God.